another episode of the Next Fix podcast, where we are touching base with people that are reaching the better end of a recovery journey and the professionals that might be helping them to do so. And today we've got Mary Catherine. She's been a professional in the space of helping people overcome their addictions, and specifically the space that she's moved into is the digital addiction, which is becoming more and more of a problem, or at least we're gaining more and more awareness of how serious our digital addiction is affecting our lives as families, individuals, and whatever it may be. And so, Mary Catherine, welcome to the show. And so, I usually hit the ground running here. And so, Mary Catherine, I want to know, in your professional experience, what have you observed in your career as being, these rock bottom moments, or what have you seen as far as despair in people's lives as a professional with digital addiction? What are some of the things that you have noticed that people may or may not be aware of that, could be a serious problem?
First of all, Ryan, thank you so much for having me on. I look forward to sharing with you and your listeners. I'm so happy to be here. But yes, unfortunately, I have seen, so many people and families suffering. And so I'll just go right into that.
Yeah.
People now realize how much digital addiction, screen addiction, social media addiction, video game addiction is really a problem. That is becoming recognized now. And people don't realize that, hey, I can get help for this. I don't have to battle it alone. So I am here, trying to help share with people about that. And so what I've seen, unfortunately, is too many families giving up. They realize, hey, screen usage is a problem in our home, and they deal with it in the typical ways, trying to be good parents, and it kind of blows up and they give up. They try to set limits, they try to do different things, and it just creates more problems. And so I hope to turn that tide. And, the same thing with individuals. People say, I think one of the main culprits is TikTok. And they say, I just get on TikTok and then I lose 3 hours and it's 2 a.m., things like that. And people really struggle. And so I like to educate them about, the addictive properties of screens. We're, familiar with how substances and alcohol, they work in your brain, in that reward system with your dopamine. Screens do the same thing. And
so,
people need to hear that to say yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So, Mary Catherine, when you're counseling people, and I suppose, maybe when was the timeline that you started maybe seeing this like takeoff of digital addiction to kind of take off, right? Because I can imagine that, maybe 10 years ago, it may not even been seriously on the radar at all. And I'm imagining that something was raising your awareness, or, I guess, how long and how serious do you feel like this is taking off in individuals' lives and families' lives? Like, what did that look like when you started really kind of seeing this, like, really develop?
Yeah. Well, when I started seeing it more and decided to become certified to treat it, that was in 2022. However, I considered myself to be kind of late to the curve there, because as I got certified, as I educated myself, these other professionals who were kind of already on board were seeing it way earlier. And of course, we know, everyone was on a screen a lot more during 2020 as a necessity, which, a lot of that was for work purposes and so forth. But then that, also just increased kids' time, especially on the screen. And so I think there was a big rise in 2020 of people getting on due to necessity and then not being able to step back and come back.
Okay.
A lot of the negative effects, on our mental health, those were starting to be seen in between 2010 and 2015. We started seeing a rise in depression, a rise in anxiety, especially among those like 10 to 14 years old who were spending way too much time on a screen even then, which was, again, before the steep rise in 2020. So being, starting to work with this in 2022, I was a little bit late to the game even then.
Right. Okay. So, and thank you for that, right? Like, that really helps my mangled mind kind of see things like chronologically. 2010 to 2014 or 2015-ish, right? Like there was a big jump then, because you mentioning 2020, that makes sense to me, right? And of course, there were so many things around the globe that kind of had a paradigm shift, or, a shift in some way or another, right? So 2020, obviously, that jump makes sense, right? 2010 to 2015, I mean, I wonder exactly what that catalyst was, but I feel like, that maybe not here or there. So what I think we can all agree on is that it's rising, right? Like I feel being a parent, I'm very concerned about this. Uh, Now, what would you say is would be like a red flag for you? You're counseling, you're coaching family or something like that. I mean, I guess what are some of those telltale signs that this is a serious problem, or that the digital addiction is superseding maybe some of these other issues that a family may be having?
Sure. Well, I would say for an individual adult or for a child or teenager, when media use, electronics use starts to create negative results in other areas of your life, when it starts to, again, negatively impact those other areas, that's when you know, hey, this is out of balance. Something's not right here. When a teenager starts to withdraw and just want to be by themselves, isolated in their room, they can have, lower grades due to a lack of ability to focus due to screens, poor communication skills, fewer interests. Here's the thing, they just want to be on their screen all the time, and they don't like the other things that they used to enjoy. And that's not just due to them growing up. It's due to the fact that, hey, they're getting these, dopamine spikes from the screen. And then these other activities that they used to enjoy don't provide that high of a spike. And so that's why they don't enjoy them anymore. So if they're just like, screen only, feeling exhausted, but you can't sleep, that's another issue with the blue light coming from the screen, especially at night. It's going to mess up your sleep in a big
Being
way.
being
And so that
exhausted.
obviously then creates problems the next day.
Right. So being exhausted, but you can't sleep, right? So your mind is kind of set to being on as a result of this blue light, right? And I'm no
Right.
scientist, but I have heard of that. Now, I also, real quick, okay, because it's when you start talking about like a teenager kind of being more introverted or seeking solitude, right? They're going to their bedroom, and immediately a song by Jimmy Eat World. I don't know how I might be aging myself here, but Jimmy Eat World. There's a song. It was about the kid couldn't wait. The lyrics are, "I can't wait to get home to be alone in my room." And then I'm thinking about when that song came out, there was no TikTok, right? Like there was nothing necessarily, the digital aspect was probably very minimal, because what are we talking about? Probably like
Back
19,
then, right.
probably, yeah. Are you familiar with the song? You know what I'm talking about, Jimmy Eat World, right? So how would you differentiate maybe just normal teenage recluse-like behavior, right? How would you differentiate, a teenager just kind of saying, "Screw the world, I just want to go sit in my room by myself and be a little bit depressed"? How would you differentiate something like that versus, the the overexposure to social media and what that all entails? Like, how do you maybe kind of split those roads to kind of know that it is the culprit is the digital addiction? How would you navigate that?
Well, first of all, that's where, the parent needs to engage the teenager or child and say, hey, I noticed you're spending more time by yourself in your room than you used to. Can you tell me what that's about? Or let's talk about that. So they're just starting the conversation would be number one, but then also just try and say, hey, you can be in your room, but your iPad and your phone are going to be out here in the den, in the living room, and see how they react. If they have, a huge angry outburst, well, that's a signal. Something like that, a device, and you attempt to take it away and there's a giant meltdown, that's too much of an attachment to any object, right? And so you can kind of gauge, did they say, okay, yeah, here, mom, you can have my phone? Or did they just go ballistic? And so just, yeah,
Well, I think that would be tough, right? Because I got to be honest, like, I suffer from what I could consider like a definite phone addiction. I'm on that thing. There is a mixture of business. There is a mixture of some things that are relevant. Some things cannot be ignored. But I could admit that there's definitely a level of addiction going on there. 100% there's dopamine spikes in my phone usage and my distraction level with the phone. It's all there. I get it. I so let me ask you, like, how about yourself? Like, how do you as a person in 2025, like, because I'm thinking this probably most people suffer from some level of this. Like, how do you combat that for your own sake? Like, how do you kind of keep that phone at bay?
Yeah, so I will tell you about myself, but also say first that yes, you can have an addiction. There is, your primary care physician can diagnose you with gaming disorder. And I think that, social media or smartphone addiction is going to come soon. So it does have addictive properties. However, also, you can just have overuse. Okay. And so, and even overuse is going to have negative consequences, whether it be, relationally, emotionally, physically, academically. We can go into all the problems that it can cause. So, but again, even if you say, I just use it too much, I don't think I'm addicted, but I use it too much, I need some help to say, hey, I've got to get control over this. So, as far as my own use on my phone, I just delete a whole ton of apps. They're just not on there. Okay. So I don't use them. I'm also very limited on social media. I'm on Facebook. I come this close to deleting my Facebook account all the time. I really do, because it is, I have to keep on top of it, right? But partially I keep it because I do have a business and I have a business page. So I don't have Facebook app on my phone. I do have the Messenger app, but like the Facebook app is not on my phone. The notifications from the few apps that I have, they're turned off. Okay. So I choose when I want to go and look and see, hey, is something going on here? Right. And so that's when I choose. It's not when the phone calls me, it's when I call the phone. So
Okay.
that,
Yeah.
that helps a lot, just to delete apps and to turn the notifications off. And so then go ahead.
Want to know more? Sorry to interrupt you. I want to know more of the gaming disorder. I didn't know that was a real thing. That's a real thing. That's like a clinical thing, like a gaming disorder. What does that look like? What does that mean?
Yeah. So that is specifically talking about video gaming. And so it's pretty specific just to that. It does not address social media or smartphones, but that has been in the
Right.
ICD-11, which is what primary care physicians use to diagnose people with the flu or whatever you have. It's in
Wow.
there.
Okay.
And
I
it's
mean,
been,
and
I
I
don't know
agree with
what,
you. It's close, right? The rest of it's probably not too far away, but I was completely unaware that you go to a primary care physician. What do you think? Not saying that you're diagnosing people with that, but what do you think that would what are the symptoms or something? Like, what would that look like if the doctor were to say, yep, you've got gaming disorder? What would some of those things look like?
again, some of the same things I mentioned for social media use.
Okay.
Lacking motivation, because here's one of the things, especially with video games, what happens is you get that dopamine spike, you get that adrenaline spike, but with electronics, that it spikes and plateaus instead of having a drug that spikes and then falls down, within some period of time. It spikes and plateaus for as long as you play the game. So you could have that high level of dopamine for 8 hours, 10 hours. I mean, some of these serious gamers, and so then when you get off, you have a big crash, but then also that leads to dopamine depletion. So you're not motivated to get up and go to work. You're not motivated to do anything else except get your next gaming session going. And so, right, go ahead.
That's okay. This is all like very new to me, right? The ups and downs I'm very familiar with as far as a substance abuser. I get it, right? And so much so that most of my adult life, like, it was shrunk down. My ability to consider the future was about 4 hours long, because that's about how long I stayed high or drunk, right? Like, and so that was the spike, the high, and then boom. And so what you're saying is that with video games and technology right behind the video game disorder, it's like when a person who is addicted to video games is on, that dopamine level stays consistently high while they're plugged in. But when they're not plugged in, they got nothing, huh? Like, so then it's like, well, then, time to go to school. And it's like, oh gosh, there's just nothing left as far as dopamine is concerned. Is that how that works? Like,
Right. Yes. Yes. And so also along with the dopamine, you have, the gamer is feeling excitement. They're like, oh, this is fun, right? But the body is interpreting it as stress and danger. And so in your body, you have that high dopamine, but then you also have high cortisol levels, high stress levels, high fight or flight neurochemicals that your body, again, is saying, stress, danger, but your mind is saying fun, excitement. And so again, putting your body in that stressed out state for long periods of time, doctors will tell you, hey, that's going to cause chronic health issues with high cortisol, weight gain, all of those metabolic syndromes.
Right. Okay. Now, forgive me, because I once I get one question, I get a bunch of other questions. Now, I lived in Las Vegas for a little over a decade, right? Now, my observation of a gambling addiction, and this was crazy to me because I was a substance guy. It was booze and drugs. I mean, the formula is a little bit simple. When you're high and you're on the drugs, you're high and everything. I knew that, right? However, I would observe people that I knew that had gambling addictions. And so there's no substance, right? There's nothing being ingested. There's nothing being shot up. There's no biological manipulation. Well, that statement is wrong, right? There's definitely a biological manipulation, but it's not done through a substance, right? So my observation of people that have a gambling addiction, and the reason why it brings to mind like what you're describing with the gaming disorder or the digital addiction, is I would see a person, a coworker, right? So in Las Vegas, a lot of times when you get off work with coworkers in the service industry, you would typically go and you'd play video poker. That's kind of how it went, right? Which it's a video game. That's what it is. And they would put in $20 and I would kind of be talking to them and interacting and we would just kind of be winding down, if you could call it that, after a shift of work. But I could see their eyes glaze over at a certain point, right? And I was always so baffled at how putting that money in that machine and then pushing a bunch of buttons would induce a state of being high. And it was almost like they were possessed and like another person. And it really did. It truly baffled me to see them biologically change and how they would become affected by the action of putting the money in there. Now, the question is here, how much or how close are those two types of addictions, the digital addiction and say, the gambling addiction on like a video machine? Do you, in your opinion, right, do you imagine that these are kind of close to each other?
Yes, unfortunately so. So those would all be under the umbrella of a behavioral addiction. Again, not a substance, but a behavioral addiction. I want to do this behavior. So it's, been known that now video game platforms are building in gambling principles into the games. And so it's like, okay, you're going along in this game and you have the opportunity to open this treasure chest, which might have a weapon you need or whatever, but it might not. But you have to pay money into the game to open this treasure chest, and you're taking a chance. And so everyone needs to know that, especially parents. If you let your child play video games, they're learning gambling principles to say, I'm just going to, pay this money with my parents' credit card and take a chance to see, does this treasure chest open a weapon I need, or does it open and it's a bag of dirt? And so, yes, it is very similar. They're all under the umbrella of behavioral addictions.
They're all under the umbrella of behavioral addictions. Right. Okay, that makes sense to me. Now, okay. Now, when you're working with somebody, right? You know, and maybe you've established, okay, this is an issue, right? Screen time causing problems, is pouring into other elements of a person's life, maybe a children's life. What do you do? I mean, I have heard some things like, changing, your phone to black and white. I even heard of a device called a cube, a brick. And it's like you have to put your phone on it to enable certain things. I don't know. I imagine, what are your best tools, right? Mary Catherine, what are your best tools or most effective methods at combating some of this when it's all around us?
I think there are quite a few what you might call tricks or little tools out there that might help someone, an adult who is just in the overuse phase. That's true. And I don't really focus on that. Here's what happens though, especially in families. There's kind of two ways to do it. Number one is you just try to limit the screen time. So you say, okay, you're going to give me your phone at 8 p.m. every night or whatever. And then it turns into a fight every night at 8 p.m. Or however you decide to try to pull back or limit, it's just a fight every single time. And so then the parents say, give up, we don't want all this fighting. Here's your phone, take it, fine. Then, the other method would be people do try to just take it cold turkey and say, okay, we are taking away this, iPad altogether or your Xbox altogether, which also, ends up mostly in these, giant fights. And then they give up anyway. There was a sad story. This was a couple of months ago down in Texas. There was a single mother, who decided to turn off the Wi-Fi in her house. And I don't know if that was meant to be like temporary as a consequence for something, or if it was like, I'm just turning it off or whatever. Anyway, so she turned it off, and her 3 teenage daughters, they were so mad at her. They got a kitchen knife and went after her. And thank goodness that the grandmother was there and intervened and everybody was okay. But like that, that shows you, I don't think that mom knew that was coming. Right?
Right.
So this addiction is a lot deeper than people fear. And so where I come in is to say, okay, I think, something drastic needs to happen, but you have to prepare for it. You can't just go cold turkey, because you're going to have, a worse outcome. And not to say that my way is easy, but you have to really prepare and do a lot of things ahead of time before you say, okay, here's how we're going to do things differently. So
And then,
that's, but that's
is it restructuring? I guess, like limits, right? Boundaries makes sense. But okay, what do you do when it's the whole dang family? What do you do when the parents are just as bad as the kids? How would you begin to address that when, maybe they're not even like, they're like, oh, well, it's not my phone. What are you talking about? Like, these issues are like, what do you do about somebody that I guess is still in that denial phase, or they don't recognize technology and digital addiction as being a real thing?
Right. Well, it certainly can be the entire family on their screen. I know you and your listeners have seen going to a restaurant and the whole family sitting there and everybody has their own device, right? And so it can be the whole family, no matter what kind of device it is. And so, yes, the whole family making a change. I think, most parents would be required to keep their phone due to, work and safety issues and whatnot, but doing that severe limitation. So 2 things I would say. Number 1, just the education piece can help children and teenagers to realize, okay, here's how my screen use is damaging me. Here's how, especially for children, but even teenagers, it is damaging my brain. And so, we know that the brain is not fully developed until age 26. And so our environment, what we expose our brains to and what we keep from our brains, really matters in literally how the brains get shaped and what connections are formed. New connections are forming, and connections that are not used are being pruned away. And so the education piece can help to motivate people to realize, like, hey, maybe too much screen time is bad for me, right? And so then also going into, okay, preparing ahead of time, here's what we're going to do instead. Because if you have a teenager or a husband or a wife, whoever, who is on their screen, from the time they get home from school until midnight, what are they going to do instead? You have to replace one behavior with another. And so that's where you have to be creative, and where someone like I can help you to say, okay, here's the lifestyle changes that are going to be healthy to help your brain to grow the way it's supposed to, and for your body to be able to rest from that blue light on the screen. So it's not just the content, because we can scroll and our minds kind of get excited with that content at night, and that the content can keep us awake, but also it's just as much the blue light tells your body that it's daytime. So your body is producing daytime hormones, energy hormones at midnight. And so then, you turn your phone off and roll over to go to sleep, and your body's like, it's daytime. Yeah. And so there's multiple reasons why it's so bad at night, especially.
Right. Okay. Now that being said, and you touched on the type of content, do you help people that have maybe malicious or negative content, or like, even pornography or something? Or are you more in tune with like the biological effects of like the blue light and things of that nature? I guess, professionally, do you work with things like that, like the type of content that people get into, or are you just trying to say that the technological manipulation or effects on our bodies, like what exactly do you work with, right? Do you work with types of content and things of that nature?
I don't at this time. I do not work with people with a pornography addiction, but because I think that also goes into other areas that need to be addressed more thoroughly, and it's just more pieces that need to be addressed. And so I have not personally gotten into treating porn addiction, but I do go into, hey, especially, any content is bad for any person, but with teenagers and children, talking to strangers online. Here's the analogy that I like to give. I tell parents, I know that you would not let your teenager go and spend the night at a stranger's house, right? I mean, that's just very simple. Of course not. I don't know these people, whatever. But when you allow your teenager to have internet access in their bedroom or just internet access at all, like that is a virtual sleepover. There are strangers in their bedroom, and you have no idea who the people are, what kind of situation that they're in, what kind of pressure that your teenager or child may be feeling. The sextortion issue is growing, and that is just horrendous. It is.
Sextortion. What's that?
Yes.
Sextortion.
Yeah. So that is where someone, a stranger or a friend, whoever, someone convinces you to take pictures of yourself naked, for their pleasure, supposedly. But then they say, hey, if you do not send me $1,000, I'm going to send this picture to all your friends or to your family or whoever, unless you send me $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever. And the teenager doesn't know what to do. And unfortunately, we've had teenagers and children commit suicide because they did not know what to do. And the parents found on the phone this sextortion issue.
Wow. Yeah, and it did make me remember. I had done a recording. I did a podcast recording with a gentleman who works with the pornography addiction specifically, and he was sextorted. Somebody tried to ransom money from him because they had videos of him doing, awful things. So that analogy that you bring up there about having a sleepover with a stranger is so accurate and so wild. I never really thought about that. And it's so relevant, right? I'm a new parent, so I'm like taking mental notes here. Now, and just to differentiate here between the different kinds of technology, right? The majority of these effects, negative effects biologically, are coming from the visual aspects of the screen. And I'll explain, why I would want to know the differentiation here, because is it the screen or is it the technology and being plugged in? And it's what I've been doing recently is some neurolinguistic programming, right? Some NLP therapy, if you will. So I'm laying in bed, my eyes are shut, but I'm plugged in wholeheartedly, right? Like I have got headphones on and I've got my phone and I'm still ingesting digital media. However, my eyes aren't involved, right? And I'm doing breath work and things like that. Like, does that fall under the radar of digital addiction, or is it mostly when our eyeballs are involved in the process?
I would say mostly when our eyes are involved, but that's kind of has two aspects to it. So our eyes, visually, they're taking in too much blue light, which is going to really affect our sleep in negative ways. It's also very much D, and so we're seeing a lot of myopia or nearsightedness more so in children than we used to. It's not that, no children wear glasses, but it's on the rise with just looking at 2D rather than looking at a 3D world. So there's that physical visual aspect of it, but then the other aspect of it that is, well, there are other aspects that are damaging physically, and that would be when you're in that excited state of mind, video games, or whether it's scrolling through social media to see, okay, who liked my post, who commented, who shared, what's the next thing going on. You're in that excitable state. Again, the body many times is interpreting that as danger. And so you are in the limbic system of your brain, and that is, the emotional center where you have anger, anxiety, fear, things like that. And then you are not accessing the prefrontal cortex, which is right here behind your forehead. And that is the area of your brain where you have critical thinking, decision making, problem solving, language, communication, things like that. And so if that part of your brain is not being accessed, you're in trouble, especially for young children. The connections between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex need to form so that they can develop things like self-control and problem-solving skills, things like that. And so it really is damaging the brain.
Wow.
And so people just have no idea that's going on, especially with young children, and the brain is not fully developed until age 26. So it's very important for parents to realize that. Also, with video games, and this is going more into academics, video games train your brain to be focusing on multiple things at once. And so then a child goes into a classroom and they can't just pay attention to just the teacher. It's this noise, that movement, and their brain has been trained to scan their environment for changes. And so we're seeing what a psychiatrist calls acquired ADHD. So it's not the brain chemistry starting it, it's you training your brain to become that way. Same thing with the endless scroll, so to speak. You're used to new information every 2 seconds or 1 second. And so you're getting used to that, again, high speed of information. And then how are you supposed to pay attention to a teacher or pay attention to your boss at work, right? When it is such a slower pace.
Or read a book, right? It's
Right.
like,
You
it's like,
can't stay focused.
yeah. And I've thought about that, different social media apps, right? These different social media groups, like if we just break it up into, simplicity here, we got like Facebook, older people, right? And then you have the more younger versions of social media, TikTok, right? And the content that is on Facebook it's like so much longer than what you find on TikTok. And I've seen myself, I can't even pay attention to TikTok because it's so rapid. Like I can't even follow what's happening. And I think that I make jokes about this with my nephew. He's 18 and he's like, well, you can't keep up. And I'm like, yeah, but you can't read a whole book. And so like, I feel like, yeah, there are some positive things about being able to rapidly do certain tasks or pay attention to many things very quickly. There is a place for that in life, right? There is a place, but the inability to pay attention to long things is also a detriment for your life, if you aren't able to pay attention at work or school for that matter. And so I see that there's there's so many layers to this, right? And so you touching on the separation between our limbic brains and our prefrontal cortex, and that disconnection or the lack of connection can be problematic, and that scares the hell out of me to think about that bond not being developed, right? And then living constantly in that limbic or using that limbic portion of our brains, it could get you into a tough spot, right? That is just so wild, though. Now, here's another scenario, and forgive me, but these things come into my mind because you kind of lightly touched on like problem solving and that type of a thing. Now say, because I could see what you're saying about like that rapid social media experience where it's like you're looking for quick dopamine hits by responses and comments and what's going on over there, and it's definitely designed to be like that. But now let's say a kid's playing digital chess, right? They're just playing digital chess with a person on the other end. They're playing a game that's strategic and in many ways probably develops problem-solving skills. I suppose, what's the real difference, right, between a kid who's using a phone to play chess and a kid who's like just scrolling?
Well, I think there is some difference there. You wouldn't want either one of them to be doing that at midnight, right? But let's
Back to
say
the
it's at
blue light thing,
a
yeah.
reasonable time of day. Yeah, if it's at a reasonable time of day and it is not encroaching on all of the other things that they need to be involved in as a kid, okay, yes, playing chess online for a little while isn't going to kill them. I'd rather them play chess with their friend in person, but sometimes they don't have that opportunity. But that, again, is a lot easier to keep under control to make it not become overuse. I don't see the addictive properties catching on quite as much. Sure. So I think there is a difference there between playing chess online versus scrolling the endless scroll or something that's very engaging. I think that the addictive properties come in, more on the social media side and the video gaming side. No, I would not want someone to play online chess for 10 hours a day. No. But how likely is that? Not super likely, because again, the addictive properties are not there as much. They would enjoy it, but they're also going to still enjoy the other aspects of their life. And so you have a lot less of a danger of that becoming overuse or addictive. So again, as long as they're not doing it at midnight and not sleeping, there could be a
Right.
difference there.
Okay, so I'm starting to put together the landscape of the space that you're in, right? Because overall addiction to anything, right, it is bad. It just is. Like, and so you assess that first. Like, how severely is this really, hurting somebody's life and lifestyle, and what other parts of their life are suffering as a result of this overuse, right? But then you're also touching on these biological effects of the blue light and the excessive world of 2D, being on a screen that size and that small for too much time, right? So there's the addiction element, which is the suffering of other parts of our lives, or anybody that is maybe addicted to, our digital toys, right? And then there's the biological effects of the blue light and the 2D world, right? Messing with our vision and things of that nature, right? So those are two parts, right? So you're assessing those things. Now, when it comes to the behavioral aspect, like, I see that becoming angry as a result of a phone being taken away or video games being taken away, and you mentioning that those girls chase their mother around with a knife, terrifying. However, like, how do you grade this? Because if you take anything away from a kid, they're going to be kind of angry. Like, how do you help? How would you help a family? I know I've already asked you this, right? But like, I'm just kind of going over in my mind, like, what age do you feel is it appropriate to start involving technology? You know what I mean? Like, because I have that question in my mind now. I've got a 1-year-old son. When do I get him an iPad? That day is going to come. Like, when am I okay to start incorporating technology? And then what do I do after I've started? Those are my big questions.
Sure. Yeah. So 2 answers there. Number 1, I don't think it's as important at this time, in 2025, to necessarily have like the exact specifications of, well, this is overuse and this is addiction, or that kind of specifics to me doesn't matter. I just look at overall functioning and say, okay, well, less is better, right? But then your second question about what kinds of limits or when do you start letting kids have these things? Yes. So when thinking about, when to let your kid have different types of screens, my first general answer is wait as long as you can. Give you a little side story and then come back to specifics. The side story is I have a friend who's a counselor and also a professor, and he's interested in this subject. And so he asked one of his classes who were juniors and seniors in college. And he said, if you have children one day, would you want to have complete access to look at your child's phone to see, who they're talking to, what the content is, all of that kind of thing? And they all said, yes, we would want to have full access to our child's phone. Then he said, at what age would you stop going through your child's phone to see what they're doing, who they're talking to? And they said, when they go to college. So here are these young people who are, 21, 22 years old, who are in that digital, they are what we're calling digital natives. They grew up with screens, and they were very alarmed about, yes, I would want to see everything my kid is seeing, and I would want to monitor it until the kid turned 18. So they take it pretty seriously. Now, I will say that the American Academy of Pediatrics has put out some guidelines about at what age, 30 minutes or an hour or only on the weekends, things like that. So that is there. However, I and other professionals that I have spoken with who work with this issue feel that those guidelines are too lenient. So if you look them up, just know that those of us kind of in the field think that's not enough. And so, like, they at least say, I think, no screen time before age 2. And that would be like a bare minimum to say they don't need to be on a screen. They just don't need it at all. And so here's another good thing, and that is now there are a few companies out there who are making phones specifically designed for teenagers. And so they have a screen and it looks like a smartphone, but it does not have the hardware to be able to connect to the internet. So they can call or text, but they don't have that internet access that, again, is opening up the world to them. And so a lot of people are turning to that to say, okay, when I want my child to have this for safety purposes or whatever. When they're at the friend's house, I want them to be able to call me, and that's understandable, but not to have that internet access when they're so young. I would say, and same for social media, I would say delay that just as long as you can. 16,
Right.
17, 18, and I know that in a sense right now that puts them in the minority, which leads me to another point that I think is so important, albeit difficult, is for parents to say, we need to find another family that's going to try to be like us in limiting their children's screen time so that they can have others who are kind of in their corner and not to feel like, oh, I'm the only one without a screen in my class. And because that's, very difficult, understandably, which is also where the piece of trying to educate them about brain health can help to say, okay, here are these, we're trying to do positive things for your brain. It's not just about taking away all your fun, which is what it can feel like to a teenager if you say, you're not going to have your phone at this time, or we're waiting to allow you on social media until age, 16, 17, whatever. And so if at all possible for a family to find another family who's also going to limit screen time is going to help a lot.
Right. Okay. Now, what would you say? Do you have anything else like, for people out there that might be asking themselves right now, like, how bad is this really affecting me? Like, how much is this getting in the way of my life? Like, what would you say, give the listeners a bit of a nugget, right, Mary Catherine? Like, if they're asking themselves right now, what if I have this digital addiction? Like, what would you tell them?
I think you just have to give yourself a test and say, okay, like say it's an individual adult. You say, okay, leave your phone at the other side of your house or put it on silent or something and try that for 3 hours and see what happens. Do you start to feel a little crazy? Are you really wondering what kinds of notifications are going off on your phone? If you're starting to feel a little crazy, that's your sign that, hey, I'm too attached. It can be seen as an attachment level. Yes, as adults, we are going to own a phone, but how attached are we? Or can we leave it and feel okay on the inside? Right? And the same thing with your child or teenager. You do a test, and say, hey, if we just go without electronics tonight, how does that go? So many parents can and have used taking their teenager's phone away for 3 days as a punishment, as a consequence for some type of bad behavior. And so, yes, I mean, depending on how badly the teenager reacts to 3 days without their phone, that gives you an indication of how attached are they. Is this an unhealthy level of attachment or
Right.
not?
And I love what you had said about, am I okay on the inside? Right. Like, as this is what it all boils down to. If you are attached to anything at an unhealthy level and you go without it, you will not feel all right on the inside. And I feel like that if we can use that as a barometer of our life, like you should be able to feel comfortable in your own skin. Now, there's a lot of people listening to this that have been uncomfortable in their own skin, hence the show, right? So these types of listeners, including myself, are the type of people that let these things get in. We don't, our boundaries and our walls, our defenses, if you will, for things kind of hooking us and making us become addicted. We're a little susceptible crowd over here. We're a little susceptible. So let's say that this, a person who's listening, they go and they give themselves that test and then they put their phone down for an evening or a weekend and they feel horrible. right? I mean, they're going through almost absolute biological effects of withdrawal. What do they do? How do they
Mhm.
get in touch with you? How do they find you to work with you? What can you do to help a person that's not all right without their phone or their computer or whatever it might be?
Sure. Well, first of all, you can just give me an old-fashioned phone call if you want to. My number is 501-290-7132. Call me up and we'll discuss, and I'll see, how can I help you? What stage are you at? Let's kind of evaluate and see how I can help. Also, I have a website which is lifewalkcoaching.com. So it's WALK, lifewalkcoaching.com. You will not really find me on social media, okay? People are like,
Interesting.
oh,
Yeah.
what's your Twitter handle? And I'm like, there is not one. Okay. If you see
Hey,
one that's me, it's really not me.
yeah, you're walking the walk. And honestly, that's a big deal for me. I say this a lot. I have a hard time trusting people. Like I have a hard time trusting somebody that doesn't walk the walk or hasn't been in that type of a position. It's like taking diet advice from an obese doctor, which I just actually went through this
Right.
recently. Yeah, I'm looking at the doctor and telling me about, nutritional value for my kid. And I'm like, you are obese. Like I have a hard
Dear,
time with that,
dear.
but here you are walking the walk, right? You are limited in your digital influence or the amount of technology affecting your biological nature and things of that. So I do appreciate that. I truly appreciate that. I'm going to have all of those resources outlined in black and white. Do you have anything else that comes to mind, Mary Catherine, that a message that you would like to leave these beautiful people with?
Yeah. I would just like to say, don't give up. If you as an individual or you as a family have tried to limit screen time and you haven't been successful, like you're wanting to do a good thing, don't give up. You can give me a call. Let's get you, hopefully connected with another family who can encourage you and say it is worth it for your own mental and emotional health and for your children's mental and emotional health and physical development. It's worth it. It's not easy, but it's so worth it. And I think you would say that in regards to other addictions as well. But just to say, you can do it. And I want to see this positive change in the world where families are talking together and kids are playing together in their front yards. I want to see that. That is normal and healthy and natural and necessary for us to thrive. So that's what I want to see.
That was fire. I really, really enjoy that. I really enjoy that you chose the word thrive because that's what I really want for everybody as well, and there's not any shortage of obstacles to get to that level of life where we're thriving. However, it is the pursuit in thriving is important, right? So I feel like that's pretty cool that you're one of the good people out there helping families and individuals to get to that level of life where they are thriving. So Mary Catherine, I truly appreciate your time and you coming on here and talking to us here on The Next Fix. And we'll see you on the next one.